So really, business rules drive what we do in software systems, and it drives how business operates. And the way those rules are stated or managed can actually affect kind of how we build a system and where we can optimize, and the robustness of it, that type of thing. So I was recently working on something, and we ran into a situation where we wanted to know so this was a system where changes were occurring, and we asked the business, are their rules state-based or are they transition-based? So a state-based rule, the if side, the predicate of this says, if this thing is in this state, we want to do blah. A transition rule is if I go from this state to that state, and I don't mean like United States, I mean like just I go from active to passive, or I go from active to inactive. A state-based version of that would be, am I inactive? So the question is, do we know which of those is important to us? Do we know that we need to run the rule on the transition from one state to another? Or could we run the rule at any time as long as we know the current state and get the same results? And I'll show you why this is kind of important. So the simple example is a driver's license. I'm going to pick this one. So I have a driver's license and I move out of state, which means I get another license in another state and I lose the license in the state I'm in. So let's pretend I'm a state and I issue driver's licenses and I have a rule. And the rule could be, if you lose your license, this needs to occur. A different rule could be for a person that was licensed. If I no longer have a license, something needs to occur. Both of these have advantages and disadvantages. I lost my license and I'm not licensed. So an event would occur where the license was terminated. Should it transition on the lost, or should we just say a change has occurred and evaluate them all? It may be that there are other changes here that we want to roll in, or it may be that we're only interested in this one change. So we need to think about that. So we're looking at event-based versus state-based. And I wrote this and it was supposed to look really cool, and now it looks like some weird paragraph divided in half. So an event-based rule is one that is bound to the event transition. It's targeted. This rule will only fire when you move from I have a license to I don't have a license, when I lose my license. A state-based rule is one that takes an action based on the current state. So we may get an event that says, hey, something happened with this license, and then we have to go and evaluate a bunch of rules to figure out which ones apply. So there's sort of this notion that you know all of the rules that need to occur on an event change, and you only run those. On a state-based, you have a bunch of rules, and they all fire trying to figure out what happened. So if we look at what this would look like, I'm going to pick a driver's license again, because most people knows how that works. I was issued a license. I lost a license. And then I was issued a license. So I issued a license. We would actually write the business rules that on this transition that I lost my license. Or for one rule, set of rules would be around, I was issued a license. I lost my license, and then I was issued again. And I'll show why this is amazingly targeted, but it has some side effects too. Another one is check license. Hey, I got issued a license. I get notified to check the license. I run the state-based rules to see the current state of my license and take any action. When I lose my license, I get another message that just says check license. It doesn't tell me what happened. It's just like check the license and see what the state is. I would run the state-based rules and then figure out what action need to be taken. And then if I was issued a license, again, the third message I would get in the state-based world is just check license. So here I actually am told what happens and I fire rules against that. It turns out there are some advantages to just doing check license. It may be, right, I have to run more rules, and I'll show you this in a minute. But it may be that I want to do that. Maybe I get confused sometimes and I didn't write all the rules correctly around transitions. There's some weird rule on the side that didn't know you could lose your license, but it turns out it needs to apply. And in the state rules, because you run all the rules or a high percentage of them, that rule way over here somewhere on the side would actually get picked up in one of these license changes. It's possible that you could have a rapid set of changes in your license or in something else. And so you would get behind, right? So when they were issued a license, we get a check license, we process the check, we get a check license, we process it. The system is down for the weekend, and they lost their license and they got issued a license. In this case, these two check licenses will show up on Monday morning. And the way the business rules are written, I probably could process both the loss and the add because I'll see that the license status changed, right? But the notion here is that you can compact these events. And if I stayed down for a week, all I would get at the end of the day is a check license. I might be able to run all my business rules at that point around the fact that I just need to look at the license history and see, oh, I did lose one, I got one, I did this, I did that. And so you could do other kinds of examples around this, but there's this notion that I need to make something happen, and if all I do is force a bunch of state-based rules to run, I don't really care what the transitions are, and I might be able to, I have to run more rules each time, but I might not have as many events that I need to process. Another thing that happens is, and I couldn't figure out how to draw this, is resiliency in a streaming architecture. So if the dash lines represent the order the messages were sent, I issued a license, I lost a license, and I issued it. Or in this case, I checked a license, and I told them to check a license. It may be that you don't process these in order. This message might be delayed somehow. Because this one got processed, then this one, and this can happen all the time, and you have to watch for this. And to correct for it is kind of complicated, actually. You actually need to like reorder stuff and like roll back and maybe whatever. In this case, I actually might end up in the wrong state because the order they were received is this on this timeline. The dash lines represent the order that they were sent. So I didn't receive them in the same order. Now on the check license, it turns out I'm good because I don't really have any notion what occurred. I can just go out and look and see what the current status is. And as long as the data is correct for each one of these messages, the order I process them doesn't matter because I'm going to run state-based rules and the same state-based rules whenever any of these happen. I talked about this a little bit before. There's targeting advantages, right? So if we did a transition-based, I might have a much smaller set of rules to run because they all know the transition we're on. So if the license is terminated, I only have this one rule. If it turns out I get a check license, I actually need to run all four of these rules. But the only one that'll actually fire is no active license. So in that case, I'll only get one rule to run, but I'll run through a whole bunch of predicates before that. People will optimize this. But the advantage is, if it turned out I didn't know all the side effects of this, if other rules applied, they would run. The advantage of this one is I can be very targeted on what runs, but I can also lose a rule if it turned out there were some rules out there that should have fired on this termination, but they had been coded against something else. So what we could look at is example message differences. And this is kind of a completely bogus example. I just wanted to give a kind of a feel for this. So if we did, a lot of times this transition change one is CDC, change data capture. So I'm going to give you the before and after view of something, and so it's really the lost license, right? And then what I can do is I can trigger a rule based on the fact that we lost the license. The CDC is amazing because it gives you before and after, and you can write a rule targeted against it. The downside of this is if you do change data capture, and that change data capture changes, then this guy's broken. So the other thing about change data capture is it only gives you the data that changed, and a lot of times these rules need extra data, so they have to go back to the source anyway. So this CDC thing looks great, but it's got its own problems, right? You have to process it in order because the changes actually occur on top of each other, right? So they got to be processed in exactly the right order, and if you got to process to combine rules to these, so you don't have to run as many, but you probably have to go to the database anyway. If you look at the if the state-driven one, all you get is license changed. So by state, you basically go out, you look at the data, you see what the state is, and then you say, oh, here's a rule that says they have no license. What do I need to do? And you can go check other state and do everything, but you had to go to the database anyway. So I'm actually going to propose here that the beauty of this state-based one is that you can run these in any order. You can do event compaction, where you can run fewer of these if your rules support it. In your event-driven system, Do you want transition-based rules or state-based rules?